morning and welcome back to the lecture series. We are discussing short story and novel, and today we are going to discuss Franz Kafka and his important work Metamorphosis. So, in the essay Kafka's Metamorphosis, 100 Thoughts for 100 Years, Richard T. Kelly mentions, I quote, "Why did he write? In the famous letter to his father, gouged out of himself during a supposed vacation in the mountain village of Shellicin in November 1919, but never sent. He dedicated his entire ear to the man who sired him. My writing was about you. In it, I merely lamented what I was unable to lament at your breast." Unquote. And then, once again, horror, humor, the trappings of the workaday, the surrealism of dreams, all are present from the first sentence. Unquote. So, Franz Kafka was born on July 3, 1883 in Prague, Bohemia, Austria-Hungary, now in Czech Republic, and who passed away on June 3, 1924 in Kirling near Vienna, was a German language writer known for his visionary fiction. His notable works, particularly the novel Der Prozess, translated to The Trial, published in 1925, and his story Die Verwandlung, translated to The Metamorphosis, published in 1915, encapsulate the anxieties and alienation that he felt and experienced, and also they are reflective of and they contain the anxiety faced by an entire generation of writers or even the ordinary people in the 20th century Europe and North America. The sense of alienation, the sense of anxiety that pervaded Europe and North America in the 20th century are concentrated in these works, The Trial and The Metamorphosis. Kafka was born into a prosperous middle-class Jewish family, the son of Julie Lowy and Hermann Kafka, who was a merchant. After the death of two brothers in infancy, he became the eldest child, remaining aware of his role as the elder brother throughout his life. Otla, who was the youngest of his three sisters, held a special place in his family life. Despite being close to his maternal ancestors due to their spirituality, intellectual distinction, piety, rabbinical learning, melancholy disposition, and delicate physical and mental constitution, Kafka did not share a particularly close bond with his own mother. Subordinate to her demanding and ill-tempered husband and his business pursuits, she, just like her father, struggled to comprehend Kafka's seemingly unprofitable dedication towards literary pursuits. So, both his parents were aversive towards his apparently unprofitable dedication towards literary pursuits, and what they would call as a recording of his dreamlike inner life. They would not see much sense in the kinds of writings he was pursuing, the kinds of writings he produced. So, Kafka's father figure loomed large over his work and his life, representing one of his most significant creations. In his imagination, this dominating patriarchal figure, who valued material success and social advancement more than anything else, appeared as both admirable as well as a repulsive tyrant. So, Kafka's attempt at autobiography, brief and then letter to father, unmailed but deeply introspective, attributed his challenges in establishing independence forming relationships and entering into marriage and fatherhood to the formidable influence of his father. So, the challenges that he was facing at all stages of life were attributed to the formidable father figure that he had. He felt his will had been shattered by his father, a conflict that is directly reflected in Kafka's story, Das Urteil, or translated to The Judgment, and on a broader scale in his novels such as The Trial and The Castle. So, we see this kind of a persecution complex, the persecution complex keeps coming back. They're psychologically very complex in nature, his writings, right? So, however, Kafka's underlying anxiety and despair extended beyond his familiar relationships, reaching a sense of ultimate isolation from genuine connection with humanity and all human beings, the society, and even a a severance from any godliness, any realization or invocation of God and divinity. He was completely severed from humans, from society, and from godly feelings. So, as the son of an assimilated Jew with German language and culture, Kafka was a timid, guilt-ridden and obedient child who excelled academically. While outwardly respected and liked by his teachers, he harbored rebellion against the authoritarian educational institution and its dehumanized humanistic curriculum. So, Kafka's opposition to established society and its institutions manifested in his declaration of socialism and atheism during his adolescence, and throughout his life he expressed qualified sympathies for socialists and attended meetings of Czech anarchists. Despite his political leanings, Kafka remained essentially passive and politically unengaged. Socially isolated and disconnected from his Jewish heritage, Franz Kafka's identification with German culture subdued his sympathies towards Czech political and cultural aspirations. His combination of social isolation and rootlessness together contributed significantly in enduring his personal unhappiness and melancholia. Despite forming connections with German Jewish intellectuals in Prague, Kafka's most intimate friend was Max Brod, who was a minor literary artist that Kafka had met in 1902. So, Brod later became Kafka's literary executor, playing a crucial role in promoting and interpreting Kafka's writings as his influential biographer. Kafka studied law at the University of Prague, earning his doctorate in 1906 and subsequently working for an insurance company. In 1908, he secured a job at the Workers' Accident Insurance Institute in Prague, where he excelled and he was well regarded by his colleagues. Despite his charming and intelligent demeanor, Kafka found the demands of his routine, of his job, and the exhausting double life that it imposed, because he was often, writing parallelly. He was spending nights staying awake and writing, and he found this dual life as simply agonizing. The fact that he has to be a very social self in his office, whereas he was writing very rebellious, unconventional works, sitting awake at night outside of office hour. This kind of dual life was agonizing for him. This struggle took a toll on his personal relationships, particularly with Felice Bauer, leading to two engagements before their final separation in 1917. Later, Kafka's love for Milena Jasinska-Polak also faced obstacles. Kafka's health suffered, and he developed tuberculosis that was diagnosed in 1917, and he spent frequent periods in sanatorium until his retirement in 1922, which was a couple of years before his death. So, Franz Kafka, reluctantly pursued by avant-garde publishers, released a few of his works during his lifetime, including sections from Descriptions of a Struggle in 1936 and Meditation in 1913. Other mature works published include The Judgment in 1912, The Metamorphosis in 1915, In the Penal Code in 1919, and A Country Doctor also in 1919. A Hunger Artist and other stories reflecting Kafka's late style were published posthumously. Kafka had reservations about his work and requested the destruction of his unpublished manuscripts before his death. So, he did not want them to be open to the public, to be read by the public. He wanted his works to be destroyed. However, his literary executor and friend Max Brod disregarded these instructions. Brod published novels such as The Trial, The Castle, and America in 1925, 1926, and 1927 respectively, along with a collection of shorter pieces in 1931. So, Kafka's early works such as Description of a Struggle and Meditation are already marked by their characteristic style, featuring characters that are struggling to communicate, following certain hidden logic, and experiencing grotesque incidents and violence. Many of Kafka's fables blend normal with fantastic elements, often presenting inscrutable mixtures. In The Judgment, a son unquestioningly commits suicide at his father's behest, whereas The Metamorphosis explores the tragic transformation of Gregor Samsa into a monstrous insect. Several of his tales, such as In the Penal Code and A Hunger Artist, delve into Kafka's recurring themes of the ambiguity of duty's value and the horror of unwavering devotion and sense of duty, performing duty, performing our social self, the horror that is associated with it. The fable Before the Law, later incorporated into The Trial, explores the inaccessibility of meaning of the law and the humanity's persistent and vain longing to unravel the meaning of law. A group of fables written between 1923 and 1924, the last year of Kafka's life, center on the individual's futile yet undaunted and unrelenting struggle for understanding and for security, right? So, coming to Metamorphosis, that was published in 1915, the opening line of the Metamorphosis: as Gregor Samsa awoke from uneasy dreams, he found himself transformed in his bed into a giant insect, unquote, initiates Franz Kafka's eerie allegory portraying dehumanization and hopelessness in the modern world. Upon his transformation into an insect, Gregor Samsa becomes a useless and embarrassing presence in his household, leading the members to resent and neglect him until his demise or his disappearance. So, Kafka's tale suggests that there is no room in domestic, social, and professional spheres for the unproductive and the non-conformist, unconventional, different individual. So, written in 1912, The Metamorphosis was among the few works Kafka published during his lifetime. Due to Kafka's general reluctance to publish and his editorial hesitations regarding the story's peculiar content, The Metamorphosis was not released until 1915. Similar to much of Kafka's fiction, the Metamorphosis reflects dominant themes in the author's own life. Kafka, in a letter, noted the resemblance between Samsa's name and his own name. So, Samsa and Kafka are kind of they rhyme, and both the writer and the central character felt pressured to undertake seemingly pointless office jobs. They were bored, they were burdened by their office jobs. Kafka's concerns about health and fear of physical deterioration manifest in the unfortunate Gregor Samsa too, who succumbs to a wound inflicted by his father. However, the narrative resonates most deeply with Kafka's family circumstances, what he had borne as a member of his own family. So much like his creation Gregor, Kafka endured continual criticism from his imposing father, who viewed his only son as an utter failure. Gregor Samsa likewise lives in fear of his father, who finds him as repulsive and attacks him continuously. So, despite earning a law degree to appease his father, Kafka continued to be the subject of patriarchal disdain and rejection, especially due to his fictional work, which his father considered as a waste of time. So, his involvement in writing is something that was looked down upon. Kafka's mother, who was akin to her counterpart in the story, remained subservient to her husband and provided only little comfort to her son. While normally a compassionate ally, Kafka's sister Otla on one occasion had sided with the parents in pressurizing Kafka to increase his office hours. So, shortly thereafter, Kafka had penned the Metamorphosis, where we see Gregor Samsa's sister betraying him by insisting that the family rid themselves of him. So, going beyond autobiographical references, the Metamorphosis incorporates influences from various literary works such as Nikolai Gogol's The Nose, where a man wakes up to find his missing nose, which is comically rising to a high-ranking position in a civil service, the nose rising to a high-ranking position in a civil service. And then we find Kafka's narrative also shaped by the Yiddish play Godin's The Savage One, extensively discussed in Kafka's diary. So, Kafka in one of his diary entries actually refers to this Yiddish play, The Savage One, that has significantly influenced his writing of the Metamorphosis. So, characters in the Metamorphosis find parallels in The Savage One, with Gregor Samsa's counterpart being an idiotic son confined to his room, unable to communicate with family and fearing his father's wrath. So, both works share a domestic setting and episodic narrative structure, linking materialism and status consciousness to the degradation of humanity ultimately. So, echoing Kafka's predominantly cynical philosophical outlook, the Metamorphosis advocates a notably pessimistic interpretation of human nature, as one finds in the modern times. It's a very pessimistic reading of the modernist effect on humanity, the effect of the modern age on humanity. In a conversation with his friend Max Brod, Kafka once expressed the belief that human beings were God's nihilistic thoughts. So, he is very negative about the creation that human is. When Brod inquired about the hope elsewhere in the universe, Kafka responded, "Plenty of hope for God, only not for us." This bleak prognosis, a sense of ultimate confinement, is embodied by Gregor Samsa, whose only alternative to the unintentionally entered world is death. So, this bleak prognosis, a sense of ultimate confinement, is embodied by Gregor Samsa, whose only alternative to the unintentionally entered world is death. So, a person that has just entered the world not by his own choice, he was born by mistake, and his only choice remains is to die, right? Because he does not fit very well, either at the domestic front or at the professional front. So, he becomes a grotesque insect, and finally he flies off the window. He dies. He disappears because he cannot be tolerated by his immediate surroundings. The concluding lines of the Metamorphosis hint at glimmers of hope as the Samsa family begins the process of rebuilding, yet this could also signify the unfortunate perpetuation of the worst human qualities, right? So, Kafka expressed regret about the ending of the book, deeming it as unreadable after the story's publication, right? Anyone that was born different had to perish, had to disappear. So, it means that what remains after Gregor Samsa, or what remains after Kafka, is the status quo of some codified behavior, some unthinking practices. So, that is something very negative, very pessimistic actually. Aligned with the Metamorphosis's bleak determinism, the surrealistic scenario portrayed, blending the impossible with the real, is inherently Kafkaesque. So, what is Kafkaesque is essentially a blend of the impossible with the real, which leads to the surreal. In various works, Franz Kafka introduces unlikely situations and meticulously depicts their development both psychologically and materially. So, for example, in the trial, a man is accused and convicted of a crime that he himself does not know, and there is a specific charge of which he is convicted, while in the before the law, a man spends decades waiting to enter. So, a man standing at the gate of justice for years, having the guardian at the gate close it on his face. That is the nature of law. How unforgiving and how cruel. That is something that interests Kafka, and Kafka delves into this domain of justice again and again in his stories. So, the realist nature of these texts encourages readers to delve beyond specific circumstances, such as a man literally transforming into an insect, in order to unravel their symbolic and allegorical implications. The insect imagery holds multifaceted significance, where a human that is different from others is as small, as insignificant, as invisible as an insect whose death does not matter. As early as 1907, Kafka described the best part of his creative self as a beautiful beetle, envisioning his body moving in the world, while his true writing self a beetle. And this remains behind, right? This evocation somehow comes back when we read Metamorphosis. In later years, as his idealism waned, this authorial image shifted to filth and slime, a phrase applied to his work, The Judgment. So, he applies these words, filth and slime, to bear on his work, The Judgment, narrating the story of a rebellious son who is condemned to suicide by his father. Gregor Samsa, a giant insect, progressively becoming filthier and more grotesque with the progression of the narrative, can be interpreted as a metaphor for disillusionment, complete incarceration by the external determinants, and not being able to fit into anywhere. So, Gregor, Vladimir Nabokov would comment, is a person concealed in the guise of an insect, and his family members are actually insects pretending to be human, unquote. In his essay on Kafka, in his Illuminations, Walter Benjamin reflects on how, I quote, the fathers in Kafka's strange families batten on their sons, lying on top of them like giant parasites, unquote. During the Marxist examination of notes on Kafka in Prisms, Theodor Adorno emotionally notes how frequently in Kafka's works the parasitic moment is displaced. Gregor Samsa, not his father, becomes the bug. It is strange enough that his father does not turn into a bug, but Gregor Samsa sadly does. What Adorno does not tackle is the extent to which Kafka, through his fiction, was displacing a sense of parasitism that he perceived in his own reflection, the miserable specimen in the mirror. He called himself as a miserable specimen in the mirror, right? So it is where Adorno is coming from is that with repetitive work, with unimaginativeness, with unthinking and a very mediocre quality of life, it is Gregor Samsa's family that should turn into an insect. They have become subhuman through repetitive unthinking acts and behavior. But sadly, Samsa has to become that insect and disappear. But it is in Samsa that Kafka is seeing his own reflection again and again. So in the essay Kafka's Metamorphosis, 100 Thoughts for 100 Years, Richard T. Kelly mentions Kafkaesque denotes a sense of suddenly inhabiting a world in which one's customary habits of thought and behavior are confounded and made hopeless. To dig a little deeper, the term evokes an individual's sense of finding himself victimized by all larger impersonal forces, feeling after a while that he cannot but take it personally, and feeling haunted too by the sense that maybe he deserves to be treated the way he is being treated. If you grant the preceding, then Metamorphosis is perhaps the quintessential Kafka story. It is something that has, in a nutshell, what Kafka felt, what Kafka believed, and what Kafka was. With this, I am going to stop our lecture here today. Thank you.